what we do here, we talk about each episode and we also recap each episode. So we're going to be doing that for EXU Calamity just like we do for the Critical Role campaign proper. And so we cut that recap out and host it separately on YouTube for your viewing convenience. So if you happen to find yourself on that video, hello, thanks for checking us out. But we also have a longer extended form of the podcast where we are going to be theory crafting, discussing, giving our review on the episode. So if you'd like to check that out, we always link that below. I don't think I missed anything there, but I just felt real rusty.
Sounded good to me. Yeah. Let's do this thing.
All right. Yeah. So without further ado, let us now jump into this recap of EXU Calamity, episode 1, Excelsior.
What a name.
I know.
Already sounds epic.
That's right. All right. So the episode opens with Brennan, who is the DM for this series, talking about how this is not going to be a fun one. This is about grief, betrayal, and the coming of a new age. It is a prequel. It takes place before the vestiges of divergence, before the Divine Gate, and before this world was even called Taldore. Welcome to Gusar. Then the episode proper starts, and we're just drutted straight into a sequence with Xerxes, this human paladin. And he's told everything feels slow, and all he can hear is his own breath, but his mouth is filled with blood. And he's just received like a massive blow to the head. Something is wrong, and not just with the situation, but something is wrong in the spirit. And he starts to see blurred shapes come in and out of focus. A building appears, and the city that surrounds it is now a hellscape. Suddenly there's a burst of energy, and it's fast at first, but then slow motion. And Xerxes finds himself just kind of floating through space from this blast. And he's just looking around, looking for anything he can recognize, anything he knows. More explosions, more disconnected moments and time kind of pulsing before him. And finally, he does see something he knows. A boy, 5 years old, red shock of hair. And it's his son. He recognizes this as his son, Elias, sitting with a fishing rod, the line kind of dangling down into this like infinite dark void. Xerxes then fights his way to make his way to his son, and eventually is able to kind of get out of this sluggish, weird slow motion movement and is able to move freely. He calls to his son, and the boy insists that he's just fishing. And Xerxes makes his way to him, is able to look down into this void that his fishing line is going down into, and all he sees are stars he recognizes. And suddenly he feels this reassuring presence behind him, and a griffin is there, formed of starlight and pure magic, and it basically nuzzles against him. And Xerxes then hears something in Draconic, which he doesn't speak, but he recognizes the word Gordranus, and that like sticks with him. Elias then tells him, Dad, you know I'm not going to look like this when you get home. And then he's like, oh, wait, I think I've caught something. Then suddenly this massive red body crashes down in front of them like the size of a mountain. And it's this gargantuan form writhing in pain. It has horns, and Brennan describes it as older than the world. The figure says, I'm sorry, and my child, I fear I'm too late. Then this massive red figure opens up its hand, and there is like this ghastly projection of a tree that it's creating, an illusion of sorts with its hand. Xerxes now finds himself standing in the hand as well, and behind him there is now a ghostly projection of his husband, Evandrin. Excuse me. And Xerxes recognizes that this is not real. This projection is merely that. It's a memory and not actually happening. But he's still comforted by the fact that, you know, this image of his husband is here. And the image rolls up to this tree that was also projected. And then something just feels wrong. The image of Evandrin like falls down to his knees as if like maybe perhaps being stabbed by something, or something had happened. It clutches its stomach. And then all of a sudden, another massive figure slams down and lands with the red one, its foot on the throat of the horned red figure. Xerxes looks up and he does not see a face. He instead sees the featureless visage of the sun itself. Presumably the Dawn Father has come down from the heavens as well and is stepping on this red figure's throat. Xerxes is still in the palm of this hand and is like, what's going on? And the sun figure says, turn your eyes away from this sinner. He is beyond redemption. He has betrayed his kin. The horn figure then looks to Xerxes and says, ask yourself, just who did we betray? And then Xerxes lifts up his hand and is like, stop, towards the sun figure. And all of a sudden, the sun figure is like thrust outwardly and is just like, they're gone. And the red figure is like, you just saved me. What you just did, no mortal can do. Brennan, the DM, then asks kind of just aloud to Xerxes and says, if you look down and see the stars, what are you going to see if you look up? And so then Xerxes kind of makes his way, looks up, and he says that you see the ground fast approaching. And with that, Brennan's like, you wake up. So that entire sequence has been this dream sequence from Xerxes, and he wakes up covered in sweat, writes down the word Gordranus, and then gets up and walks over to the balcony of his tower, which is the tower of the first knight of Avalier. And it's a beautiful day in the city. And we kind of then transition to our next character introduction of Loquacious, which as Xerxes is looking over through the city, he sees all these screens and this massive waterfall at the top of the city. And suddenly an image starts like appearing on the waterfall as if it too is a screen. And we have the image of the changeling Loquacious, who is Sam's character. And Loquacious is basically like a news anchorman that is reporting the news of the city, and he does this every morning. So he starts giving the daily announcements and, says it's the eve of the replenishment. There are lots of events and festivities to be had. And then he runs through a couple ad reads, but because he's a changeling, he actually morphs his appearance like into the person that is giving the ad. I think what he specifically does here is like some ad for Orison's glue, and so he turns into Orison. So after he does the announcements, the broadcast ends, and Loquacious turns to his assistant and kind of has a moment where they're running through like all the different things Loquacious has to do, discussing his to-do list. And most importantly, there are some of like the screens, the crystal columns, I believe they're called, for his broadcast are malfunctioning in one part of the city. And he's like, how has this not been fixed yet? Like, did you tell them like I needed this fixed? And he's like, okay, you know what? I'll just reach out to the arcane architect myself, because, it is my ex-wife. And so he's deciding he's going to go deal with that in person. Then we transition to Laren, the said arcane architect. And this is Abria's character, and she is this female elf wizard, basically just at work on this massive arcane engine deep beneath the city of Avalier. And she's just staring at it, trying to figure out what else can I like improve? What else can I perfect on this? I've reached the point where basically everything is already perfected. And as she's having that thought, she gets what I want to call a phone call. They've got like these arcane bracelets that essentially are kind of like cell phones. So it rings and she picks it up, and it's just I think Guildmaster Akami Ro, and just catching her up on the status of the upcoming conjunction of the two cities. Weather looks good. We should have arrival shortly after 1 a.m. So while she's dealing with that, another man approaches in real life, not through the phone, and he claims he has news. He's just come from the Grand Geometer and says that, hey, you told me that if the reading was ever above a 0.025, you wanted to know immediately. So that's why I'm here. The reading is 0.5. Laren is stunned by this and is like, okay. And so she heads back to her quarters. And with an Arcana check of 27, she recalls about celestial solstices and how every 20 to 30 years, the veil between realms becomes very thin. But every 120 years, there's something called an apogee solstice where everything aligns, and the veil is so thin that like this incredible magic can be achieved. The magical ley lines of Exandria itself can even be remapped in an apogee solstice, and there's just means crazy things are possible essentially. And what the grand geometer is it's this measuring device that measures the shifting of those ley lines. And anything over a 0.025 means that there is a shift happening. And again, like she was just told, it is currently reading 0.5. So Laren begins to like just weep. This has been everything she's been working for so long, everything she's sacrificed, and now she has so little time to actually take advantage of the moment. But as she's dealing with that, a knock comes at the door, and it is Loquacious, her ex-husband. They've got some typical, ex-married couple back and forth. And as they do, Brennan describes all these spell kites coming into Avalier. And essentially, the two cities, Avalier, Cath Moira, the replenishment means they're coming back, conjoining together, and this is a big, joyous event. And part of it is the people of Cath Moira send up these spell kites, which have food, letters, just cute little items and gifts that float up to the people on Avalier to kind of welcome them back. And as that's happening, we kind of have another transition of kites arriving at the Vault of the Golden Scythe. And the Vault of the Golden Scythe, is this just place of unfathomable wealth. There are countless automatons buzzing around, wheelbarrows full of perfect diamonds and gold. Brennan even mentions a bridled unicorn. And at the center of all of this is Nidus, who is a human male sorcerer / bard. And he is the guild master of this place. And he is quickly approached by his chief bookkeeper, who tells him that they are over budget on wands and they need to figure this out. Nidus is like, it's the replenishment, spare no expense, like do what needs to be done. And Nidus handles a few other little like business fires that need to put out as he is the guild master. Before finally another man comes up to him, Magister Milas Friend. And Nidus doesn't recognize this person. He even rolls a history check and is told, yeah, you don't know who this person is. He's nobody. So Nidus is like almost offended that this like nobody would come ask him for a favor. And he's like, this man is far below my station, and like, how dare you even ask? He doesn't say that to him, but that's kind of how he feels. And because that is the situation, Nidus's assistant barges in and interrupts to kind of save him from the moment. Now, once again, we transition and we are heading on over to Cloudstone, which is this large marble building with a massive like eye overhead. It's not a place of magic and robes or arcane, but more weaponry. Brennan describes it as magic does not echo here. It is a place of sharp clarity. And here we're introduced to Guardian of the Seventh, Senior Sight Warden of the Eyes of Avalier, Seret. And he is a male Eusphora, like a bird person. And he walks into this room with a collection of artifacts, magical items, and just ruined items all floating around in this pure white room of marble.
Very Minority Report-esque.
Yes, exactly. I thought the same thing. And a half-orc named Orwin walks up to Seret, and the half-orc actually refers to Seret as Pinch, which is one of his nicknames. So he asks Pinch about... Orwin reports about his time over Vasselheim and says that, hey, the Archmage Vespin Chloros has gone missing. The people of Vasselheim are worried about this. They're worried that maybe some heresy against the gods has taken place, and they want us to check to see if maybe Chloros is hiding here. Rumor has it that Chloros maybe tried to replicate the matron's ritual. Orwin then asks, actually, where did we get all this stuff? And he's told that a member of the Ring of Silver said it needed to be saved for like posterity and academic reasons. Seret then says, all right, light it up. And in the center of the hall, using pure transmutation magic, meaning this is not an illusion, but an actual one-to-one replication, the sanctum of Vespin Chloros is recreated in perfect detail. Seret then investigates the scene, kind of like swiping through the room, And with a very high investigation check, he notices that there are glyphs, both of celestial and infernal origin, and something else on the floor that is like very badly corroded and nearly destroyed. He examines that and notices that it has been disenchanted, and it was formerly much larger. With his really high roll, though, he realizes that this item wasn't specifically disenchanted. However, there was some wave of energy that just as a byproduct happened to disenchant anything that it passed through, just due to proximity. And for something to have done that, Sept recognizes that it had to be extremely powerful. He also notices the remnants of what appears to be a summoning circle that was also eradicated by this wave. And recognizing these things, Sept tells Orwin, like, hey, nobody can know about this yet. Like, I need to run this by some people higher up first. And then we transition to the pinnacle of Avalier, this magical floating city, where we see the Arch Sept, home to the most powerful wizards in the city. And before it is this massive statue of Emir the Bold, who is the wizard whose magic lifted Avalier into the sky originally. And at the foot of this statue is the Archmage of the Librarium Incantatum, Paisha, a middle-aged elven woman and granddaughter to Emir. She unexpectedly sees Eladmir the Wise, one of the true seven, which is like there's seven like leading wizards of this whole city. And Eladmir tells Paisha, "It's a pleasure to meet you face to face." He knew her grandfather, and basically starts telling her a few stories that she already knows, but is just being polite. And with the small talk, they then get into, how is everything coming along for the replenishment and yada, yada, yada. But Eladmir also has a couple of apprentices with him, and one of those says, hey, Aor may be preparing an attack on Lathris. Paisha, do you have something up your sleeve for this? Now may be the time to use it. He then also mentions that artifacts from Vasselheim have made their way into the city, into the possession of Sept, and explains that these items may have been used to replicate the Maiden's ritual. That's the rumor going on. Eladrin is concerned by this news and tells Paisha that, hey, anything you learn about that, you come tell like me directly. Like, don't use the usual channels. Like, come tell my apprentice or me. And with that, having introduced all of the members of this cast here, we go into the first half break. And
oh my gosh,
trying to get through that as quickly as possible, but I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many amazing details that Brennan described. So great job. There's definitely, if you're watching the replay, you need to watch the whole thing, by the way, because it's great. But
yeah,
picking up from the break, if you've been wondering at this point, how are all these people going to get together? It's because on the eve of the replenishment, which is, like Will mentioned, it's when Avalier is basically going to land. I think of like the spaceship from the first Star Wars, like the big ring that goes into. It's kind of like that, and it lands around the city of Kathmoira, and like all of the ether it's built up, it like releases into the land, and that's the replenishing. And so the night before that happens, they have this big party called the Parade of Beasts. Including a specific dinner called the Feast of Emir. So the way the party all gets together is they are all arriving at Excelsior Plaza, specifically at the Palazzo Porco, where they're going to have this feast. And you find out that all of these people are part of, really, they're like a band who gets together and they talk about stuff going on in the city. And they've met plenty of times before. It's a little vague, Xerxes spot on this group, because they mention that it's one of he's brand new to this title of First Knight. It's not really clear exactly what that title means, but he's clearly, like, because of his either courage or like his proficiency in battle, he's risen to this rank where now he's part of this council, I guess. But so the party, they arrive at this feast, and they all arrive, think about like red carpet arrival, at the Oscars. That's kind of what it's like.
Yeah.
And so Loquacious, who also goes by Quay, when he arrives, he kind of feigns this like, oh no, like all this attention, but secretly he like really loves it. And, his ex-wife's kind of bitter because he's got like this young girl named Bolo, who's like hanging on his arm. And it's kind of like your cliche, like idiot young girlfriend in the movies, I guess. So she's asking all these questions. He's enduring the reporters. Sarah just sort of flies in kind of unnoticed. And Xerxes comes in on his griffin. And so once the party has kind of all made their way to the feast, they do eventually kind of steal away and get together and begin talking about, hey, what's going on in the city? And Will mentioned an interesting detail about Loquacious noticing certain like not cameras or like TV screens, but like certain elements not working in the city. They also mention how they haven't heard from, and I can't remember the name of it, the Hall of. Do you know it, Will? Basically it's a division in the city where the people who can sort of have prophetic vision can see what's going to happen, right. Or it's not quite clear if it's like that, if it's that deliberate, but that they have like a gift of foresight basically, and that those doors have been closed. They haven't heard anything from those people in some time. It's kind of odd considering it's in the city. Also, Xerxes mentions the dream that he had and basically says, I think I dreamt of like a war between the prime deities and the betrayer gods. And the party, since they don't know him quite well enough, are kind of thrown by this, but I think it's Sarah who kind of determines this. This is a bit detailed, and it's kind of unlike Xerxes just to make up a dream. So they talk about that, and specifically, Xerxes mentions the draconic expression Gordronish, which they realize means gathering of shadows. And the lore behind that is that when one of the betrayer gods was sealed, so to speak, like sealed in the depths of in Exandria's world, hell, basically. He basically, like in his final words, said that he would gather his shadows to him. And it was basically like an expression of like omen, of like returnal, basically. And so that expression has a very, very apprehensive connotation around it that they discuss. They also know that, Sarah mentions some of the artifacts that they picked up from the home of Vespin Chloris from Vasselheim. And specifically, they're curious about this guest coming to the party named Pervan Sol, who is a champion of the Raven Mother. Is that right? Did I say that right?
Yeah. The Raven Queen, like the matron of ravens.
Matron of ravens. Thank you. And so they're curious about this guy. They want to meet this guy. And essentially what ends up happening is, as parties tend to do, the party actually does split up to kind of cover a couple of like the most important things. Specifically, actually, before this happens, I will mention that Laren, who's noticed sort of like this spectrometer reading, realizing that there's these artifacts from Vespin Chloris, is immediately intrigued, and it's kind of like, I think she even makes a comment like, that's what I need for like the next steps of like what's coming, I guess. Yeah. And it's not meant in like a very it's not meant like in an evil way. It's just like, because this is like a massive moment in history, that's probably the perfect item that I will need. And I should also mention, without getting too in the weeds, there's a lot of also references to the different like governing bodies within the city. Mm-hmm. There's comments on like the Court of Owls who are present. There's something called the Ring of Silver mentioned. I think there's also like a Ring of Gold mentioned. Yep. So I wonder if there's a Ring of Bronze. I don't know if they mentioned one, but I remember thinking like, I wonder if there's one. And these are sort of like different like echelons of like authority within the city. And they also do find out that this sort of rusted, burned away item was formerly a bow. And it was a bow, I think, of like a solar champion or something to that effect.
Yeah, I think they're just called solars.
Yeah.
They're
But
like angels,
basically,
kind of.
exactly. I think of like a celestial angel who has a bow.
Yeah.
A Cupid you don't want to mess with, I guess. But all that to say, Xerxes and Loquacious basically they want to go talk to Pervon Sol. And specifically, Xerxes is apprehensive around this dream. And so he's thinking this is someone that I can talk to who has sort of a connection to the prime deities. And yeah, really, I just want to know what's going on. So they go off to talk to him. And in this conversation, this is a character who has a pet wolf, basically.
Yeah.
The dude's cool. There's a really fun like back and forth between Brennan and Loquacious, where Loquacious is kind of like, hey, would you give like a exclusive interview? It's just a great character.
Yeah.
But Pervon basically admits that they are aware already of Vespin Chloris, but there's something different about Vespin Chloris. And it's basically implied that since the Raven Queen's ascension to godhood, that there have been an endless number of, think of like drunk mages who are just like, I'm gonna do that. And so there's kind of like this sort of not laughing stock, but kind of like this like joking or camaraderie around like, oh, another one of those, like these crazy people trying to do the same thing.
Yeah.
But he points out that that's not the case with Vespin Chloris, that something was different here. And it's got the deity spooked a bit because, and we get a bit of the background too on the matron of ravens, how when she ascended and then she actually killed the previous god and quote like smote his name from like the history books, so to speak, in a very epic way. And Pervon Sol basically says that the deities have all spoken and none of them felt any kind of intrusion on their domain.
Yeah.
So the way the conversation goes then is that Vespin Chloris wasn't trying to ascend to become a god and take out one of the prime deities, but that he actually potentially descended to the realm of the betrayer gods, either to take one's place or to maybe even free one. So it's pretty clear that Vespin's not a good dude. But Pervon basically also implies like, hey, the people you make your company with aren't to be trusted. Like these are, I think he calls them like a brood of vipers. Like these are very greedy people, and you would do well to just be mindful of who you keep your company with. So that happens. Separately, at the feast, there are these automatons. I can't think of what they're called. There was an actual like expression for them.
Yeah, he kept calling them like his scarecrows or something, but there was some other word.
They were scarecrow-esque, but there was an actual name for them.
Yeah.
But regardless, Hamadad.
Or
something. We get it. Well, there's this one automaton who's basically serving drinks and like suddenly glitches, and there's something very odd about it because this is very uncommon. This is an uncommon sight, and then it basically falls over and sort of deactivates, and all the champagne it's holding like spills out. Sirrit, who I have thought of as kind of like the Tom Cruise detective of Minority Report, immediately notices like something's off here. He scoops up the automaton, takes it to a private room, and then rolls an investigation check, or possibly a perception check. And he also has 2 class abilities that also enhance that check. And he rolls a 31. It's a crazy high roll. And with the 31, he's looking it over, and Brennan, our GM, mentions, "You're not alone in this room." Brennan has an absolutely amazing description of how the invisibility spell works, and basically says that to cast invisibility, you can't be perfectly invisible. You have to still let your pupils be exposed so that the light can come in. You can actually still see. And so with the 31, Sirrit is looking in a mirror, and he notices behind him these 2 tiny pupils behind him, like the size of a grain of sand. Immediately pulls his axes, slashes, kills this person, which, it could have been a good person. I don't know, but kills him. Dude falls over, and coming out of the invisibility spell is this ragged, shell of a person who's been mutilated, lips have been cut off, eyes are orange and bloodshot. He's got patches of skin that are sort of like stitched together.
Ugh.
And it's just this dead body in front of him. And then he hears this voice behind him that says, "You'll never reach the Wild Mother's embrace in time." And he looks, and in the mirror is sort of like this swirling fog, and he sees the mutilated face of Vespin Chloris. There's this great moment where Brennan actually screams and reaches at Travis, and Travis screams, and the mirror basically cracks. Vespin disappears, and that is where our episode ends of Calamity, episode 1, Excelsior.
Man, it was so good.